Hey everybody. In this lecture, we're going to talk about shifting political power in Denham. Specifically, the movement away from the Board of the Selectmen back to the town meeting. As we talked about before, when Denham was originally established, the General Court back in Boston mandated that the town meeting would be the ultimate source of political authority in the town. But after a few years of all the adult men going to the meetings and having to deal with every little issue that was coming up in the town, a number of them became tired of it. And the select board was created in 1639 to allow a group of these select men to deal with most of the daily operation of the town and let everybody else go on and live their lives. And this is how it remained through most of the 1600s. But by the time you start getting towards the end of the 1600s, there was an increasing push for the town meeting to be used to solve and deal with political issues in the town. So let's get going. Let's start talking about this. Well, what were the signs that the town meeting was growing in power in Denham? One of the most obvious signs was the increasing use of the town meeting, that there were more town meetings being called. For most of the 1600s, after the Board of Selectmen had been established, town meetings were held for once, usually twice a year, and the biggest issue that was dealt with was voting on the Board of Selectmen. But by the time we start getting to the end of the 1600s, and in particular the 1700s, town meetings were being called more often, 4, 5 times a year, because they were dealing with an increasing number of issues. Lockridge tells us, you could see this. There were historical documents. For each town meeting, they would have an agenda that would be listed that was going to be dealt with at the particular town meeting. And there were more and more issues that were being brought before the town meeting. A lot of these issues that previously would have been handled by the Board of Selectmen, but now were being dealt with by the town meeting. The agenda shows this. There were other ways that the town meeting was starting to reassert itself. As the town grew, as there was a bigger population, as there were more institutions being created in the town because of this population, there were new duties that needed to be dealt with. And so there were new positions being created. Constable, law enforcement, assessor, someone assessing how much taxes people were going to have to pay, treasurer, dealing with the collecting of the taxes. There were fence viewers. Because of the way, and we talked about this quite a bit, that the people of Denham divided their farmland. There were lots of disputes about where does my land begin and where does my land end. Originally, the town meeting dealt with this, and then the select board dealt with this, but it became such an issue that they started to assign an individual person that would be their responsibility to deal with all these issues. There were all kinds of growing appointments, positions popping up in the town as we're getting to the late 1600s and early 1700s. This increasingly became the responsibility of the town meeting to appoint people to do these jobs. So they were going to be the boss. They were going to take control over this. All right. Maybe most important of all of these responsibilities that the town meeting was taking over was over taxation and spending. Now, they had to do this in a bit of an indirect way. Lockridge tells you that the town meeting would have liked to have dealt more with legislation. In other words, passing laws. But early on, the Board of Selectmen created such complicated rules and bylaws for writing laws that it would have been difficult for the town meeting without just completely abolishing the Board of Selectmen, which they didn't want to do, to work around these regulations and bylaws that the select board had created. So the simple workaround for this was, okay, Board of Selectmen, you can create laws, you can pass laws, but we, the town meeting, will now be in charge of approving the money to pay for anything you want to do legally, which basically gave the town meeting a kind of veto over whatever legislation that was being passed, whatever laws were being created by the Board of Selectmen. So say, for example, the Board of Selectmen decided we're going to build a road from this area to that area, and it's going to cost this much money. The next town meeting, the town meeting would be responsible for saying, okay, we will either approve the money to allow that road to be built, or, we voted on, we decided, no, we are not going to appropriate funds for that road to be built. This was an important source of both direct and indirect influence of the town meeting over the Board of Selectmen. Direct because they could directly allow or deny funding for laws passed by the select board. Also indirect because once this started happening, the Board of Selectmen had to get it into their head like, oh, we got to worry about if the town meeting is going to approve this spending, so maybe we should find ways to make it cheaper or less burdensome so it will get approved. So this was a tremendous source of authority. Also, Lockridge tells us that, particularly as we get into the 1700s, the town meeting was increasingly dealing with more and more minor issues. Even after the select board was created in 1639, they still held town meetings, and town meetings dealt with some issues that people in the town, the men in the town, felt like they wanted some input to. Even at the height of the select board's power, the town meeting still voted on some issues and created laws and spent money. But remember, the reason they stopped using the town meeting is because they got tired of little trivial minor issues, the minutiae of local government. And as the town meeting reasserted itself, particularly in the 1700s, you once again got lots of these minor little issues that a lot of people didn't want to deal with. That same old dynamic returned where it's like, do we all have to be here to listen and deal with this? This time, the way they dealt with it was the creation of ad hoc committees to deal with certain issues. An ad hoc committee means a temporary committee that only deals with one singular issue. Okay. Let's say a particularly difficult boundary dispute over multiple neighbors. Again, this happened a lot. Well, instead of leaving this to the Board of Selectmen, the town meeting could decide, okay, we're going to appoint a few of us in here, a small number. So all of us don't have to deal with this. A few of us will deal with this. And we will only deal with this one issue, and then once this issue is dealt with, our committee will be over and done. We will dissolve. Right? This allowed the town meeting to deal with either minor issues or burdensome issues that most people in the town didn't want to deal with, but to do it in a way in which they would control the committee. And it would be temporary and only deal with that issue. It was a new workaround for the town meeting to retain its power. Okay? Now, if the town meeting was increasing in power, the Board of Selectmen must have been declining in power, right? This is a sum game, a zero-sum game. The more the town meeting was becoming powerful, it was diminishing the power of the select board. What were some of the signs? Well, we've already talked about some of them that's going on, but here's some other examples of it. One of the things Lockridge talks about, by the end of the 1600s, and definitely by the 1700s, members of the select board were increasingly being voted out of office, much more frequently than they were before. Remember when we talked originally about the select board, we said one of the characteristics of the early select board that all these men seemed to share, or most of these men seemed to share, was they were few in number. And they were few in number because they kept getting reelected again and again and again. Well, particularly after that first generation retired and died off, and the second and the third generation were taking them. We'll talk later about the importance of this first generation. Nobody had quite the same respect, the same gravitas in the second and third generation that first generation had. And so it was easier to vote these people out of office. And as there was less willingness to abide by and use the select board, it was easier to vote these people out of office. And because of this, and then there was a sort of vicious cycle to this. As people were being voted out of office more quickly, newer members with less experience, fewer connections, meant that, again, it was easier to vote these people out of office. Once somebody had been in office for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you're going to really vote them out of office? You think some new person is going to be better than that person that has 20 years of experience? Well, if somebody's only been serving a year or two, it's a lot easier to get rid of them. And so people didn't accumulate the same kind of respect and power, and also just know how to deal with issues in a savvy way. Now, all of this, talking about the reassertion of the town meeting and the declining power of the select board, does not mean that the select board disappeared, that it went away. It didn't go away. It was still there and still did deal with issues and still had power. What Lockridge tells us was that what was really happening was a kind of balancing of power, a kind of checks and balances. As the Board of Selectmen grew in power, there was as we get to the late 1600s and early 1700s, there was less inclination to allow this powerful institution to run the town unchecked. Yeah. Well, what are some causes? Well, why was this happening? Okay. One of the issues had to do with changing voting rights. Okay. Remember when Lockridge tells us in the beginning of the town, in the early creation, voting was restricted to adult men. In the beginning, it was pretty informal about who could, you had to be 24 years old or above. But he speculates kind of, it was probably pretty informal. Like if you were around that age, 22, 21, you showed up, you were there, you probably got to vote. But as time went on, there were increasing requirements for voting. In 1647, a new requirement for voting became it was only open to church members, male church members. So that meant by 1647, Lockridge speculates, that would have meant about 70% of the men in the town could vote. In 1658, they added a new requirement. Along with church membership, you had to have 20 pounds of taxable land. In other words, you had to have enough land where you would have to pay at least 20 pounds a year in taxes on that land. That wasn't, Lockridge tells us, a huge amount of land required, so that probably didn't change who could vote for the most part. Most men could probably still continue to vote. In 1670, that number dramatically increased to 80%. That was a huge amount. However, the law was grandfathered in, and what I mean by grandfathered in, that meant if you could already vote, if you had 20 pounds of taxable land, you could continue to vote. This new law of 80% would slowly be brought in for younger generations who were going to be coming of age to vote. All right. So again, even though that 80 pounds of taxable land was a huge increase, it was going to be brought in gradually. But eventually it would come in. And by the late 1600s, it was dramatically reducing the number of men that could vote in town meetings and be able to vote for the Board of Selectmen. And this was creating resentments. And by the way, once again, Denham wasn't the only town experiencing this movement towards the town meeting and changing voting rights. And this was becoming such an issue that in 1691, the General Court in Boston stepped in and forced towns to lower voting requirements to allow more people to vote. And what they did is they returned voting requirements back down to, you only needed to be a member of the church, but also have only 20 pounds of taxable land. And so this dramatically increased the number of men that could vote in the town. This Lockridge, excuse me, this Lockridge argues allowed a lot more men to start coming to town meetings and start voting in town meetings, and also voting out people that had been on the select board and vote in new people onto the select board. So changing voting rights and this reduction in 1691 of voting requirements, Lockridge argues, is part of what happened in bringing about more power to the town meeting. Another issue. As the population grew in Denham, there remained a limited number of seats on the Board of Selectmen. In fact, there was a little bit of fluctuation in the beginning, but for most of the 1600s, the number of men on the select board, it was a committee of 7 men. There were 7 men on the Board of Selectmen. This number got dropped down to 5. They decided, let's only have 5 people on the Board of Selectmen. But as the population grew, for ambitious men who would have wanted to be on the select board, there was less opportunity because there was more competition to get on the Board of Selectmen. Early on, when the town was small and the population was very small, you had a better shot. You had a better shot to get onto the Board of Selectmen. As the population almost doubled by the 1700s, there was less chance you were going to get on there. And so Lockridge argues that for men of ambition, men that wanted influence in the town meeting became the place where they could try to find opportunity and express that ambition when they were being denied getting on the board of select men. All right? Lockridge also argues from the perspective of town members. This growing population also had an effect. Early on, when the population was smaller in Denham, most people had pretty ready access to members of the Board of Selectmen. You know, it wasn't a bad chance you had a family member on the Board of Selectmen, a father, an uncle, a cousin, or somebody you knew well, a good family friend, a neighbor, a person that lived two lots away from you in the village. You knew him. You could talk to him. You could feel like if you had something to say, your voice was being heard. But as the number of selectmen was reduced from 7 to 5, and as the population grew and grew and grew, the chances that you knew a member of the Board of Selectmen really well was decreasing. And so, once again, Lockridge argues that this was another reason why people started turning to the town meeting. If you sort of felt like, I could go to the Board of Selectmen, but I don't really know any of those guys very well. I don't know if they're going to pay attention to my issue. I would rather go to the town meeting. And that is a collection of men like myself. And I think they will give me a better hearing there than the Board of Selectmen. Right? And so that's another reason he accounts for that. And finally, what we talked about last time, this breaking up of the town and the creation of new towns coming out of Denham, and the creation of precincts and parishes coming out of there. Those people that sought greater independence from the village really used the town meeting more than they used the Board of Select Men. The Board of the Select Men were mostly focused on the village and paid attention to the issues of the village. But the town meeting had people from lots of different areas of Denham. And so people from one area that wanted independence would often find support from other people in other parts of town that also sought independence, and there was ways to form alliances and voting blocks that way. And so that's another reason where it would be difficult to find influence on the Board of Selectmen to gain independence in the town. So by the time we get to the end of this 100-year history in Denham, what Lockridge says is that there develops a greater institutional check and balance in Denham rather than power. Remember when we talked about the Board of Selectmen originally, and we said that they almost had dictatorial power over the town? Lockridge says as time went on, the members of the select board became a kind of natural aristocracy, that, they weren't actual kings or princes or dukes, but took on a kind of informal kind of aristocracy in the town, and were quite powerful. And as time went on, as we get into the late 1600s and early 1700s, there was a desire to diminish the power of these powerful men. And so the town meeting became the way where popular will was increasingly expressed in the town. So you had this balance, Lockridge tells you, between what you could kind of think of the Board of Selectmen, he says, as executive authority, like what we would think of contemporary politics, almost like the president that can make unified, quick decisions. And then the town meeting, which you could sort of think of like Congress, and supposed to be expressing the broader will of the people and individual constituencies that's starting to develop. So this kind of balance of power develops in Denham. Okay, that's enough for this talk. You guys take care. I'll see you next time. Bye.